Well, you've had your first content meeting. If you haven't already, I'd encourage you to evaluate how it went, especially in light of your goals. This is something that I would recommend you do on a regular basis. One of the mistakes that we make is that we tend to think of ourselves in static terms. We think of ourselves as being good leaders or bad leaders, and really we should be thinking of ourselves as growing leaders. We are growing in God's grace. We are growing to be the leaders that He has destined us to be. And there's a learning process with that. There's a self-evaluation process, and sometimes maybe having somebody else evaluate us. But the idea is that we are looking at what we're doing and we are seeing how we can improve upon it. And when we do this, it is for the benefit of everybody. So my questions that I would have for you are, were you pleased with the meeting overall? Are there certain aspects that you can improve upon? How did your approach to the discussion go? Is there anything you need to tweak in that regard? These are some of the questions and maybe others that you can ask yourself. Just want to do the best that you can, offer the best experience for the people involved. Now, before we touch on the content for this week's meeting, let's discuss those who are in the opposing ends of the talkative gradient. For some people, talking is like breathing. It is like entirely natural. They share their thoughts and feelings with little to no prompting. Sometimes they continue to talk even when you prompt them to stop. Some people just get so excited about a topic that they find it difficult to contain themselves. One of the bigger challenges with talkative people is that they can lack situational awareness. What I mean is that they are so consumed by their own thoughts and ideas and what they want to say that they lose track of the people around them and the effect that they're having on those people. They end up dominating a conversation, which is never good for everybody. Sometimes they have an awareness, but they continue to talk anyway, and then afterwards they're feeling guilty or struggling with it. They can be very self-conscious about the issue, is what I'm trying to say. So if you get the sense that someone's going to overdo it in your meetings, you might want to talk to the person privately about your concerns. Try not to make that discussion too heavy or accusatory, but be clear to communicate that there are multiple people in the group who also have great things to contribute. As an example of this, one man attended several of my groups through the years, and he would get so excited as we talked about the things of God and about biblical concepts that he would just begin to take over the conversation. Thankfully, we were able to develop a friendship. We even came to the point where we could joke about the issue, and we came up with a plan for his wife to elbow him in the side if she thought that he was coming on too strong. That approach worked pretty well as long as they sat beside each other. At the other end of the spectrum, we find people who are silent as a light breeze on a summer day. They're like rocks. If they didn't move, you wouldn't know they were there. One of your challenges is to understand why. Why are they so quiet? I'm not suggesting that you psychoanalyze them or anything like that. What I'm saying is that everybody is different, and if you can understand a person's motivation, you can help that individual towards growth. Some of those who are new to the faith or maybe new to small groups prefer just to hang back, watch, and listen. It's best not to push these folks. Give them an opportunity to acclimate, and the chances are that over time they'll begin to feel more comfortable and they'll begin to contribute. But there are others who really do want to participate, but who have difficulty getting over their fears. I've had some great one-on-one conversations with these types of people, and those conversations have proven to be very productive. I'd let them know that I wanted to help and that I would nudge them at certain times, but without making the experience too overwhelming. And with their approval, with their agreement, when the time was right, I asked that individual a relevant question. It was something that maybe didn't put the person too much on a spot or wasn't too heavy, but something that would cause the individual to come out of themselves, to contribute, to say something as a part of the group. And many, many, many times, those individuals had gems of wisdom to contribute. They were just afraid to do it. So everybody benefited whenever they took that step. I've also had similar experiences with people who have never prayed in public before. For some of us, if we're accustomed to praying publicly, that's like a no-brainer, no big deal. But for others, this is a daunting experience, especially if they've grown up in a faith tradition where you just did not do that. So in one group in particular, we had two older Christian women who said during the group that they had never prayed publicly. And so I asked them, is this something that you want to do? And they both said yes, but they were afraid to. So I just told them that with their permission, there would be a time when I would give them that opportunity. And they both kind of reluctantly agreed. And so it happened, for both of them at different meetings where I asked them if they would close a meeting in prayer. And it was daunting for them, but they took that step. And it was just another step in the growth process. And thankfully, the groups were all behind them and supportive. So this is part of what we're all about, is we're helping nudge people toward growth. But the thing that we want to remember in all of this is life is never one size fits all. Get to know the people in your group, and as you get to know them, you'll know best how to respond to them and how to nurture them toward growth. And speaking of getting people talking, depending on the history and makeup of your group, the conversation should begin to flow a little more naturally by now. If you've got a big enough group and you've got people that are fairly talkative, they should be getting comfortable with one another a little bit more. And much of your leadership won't involve trying to get people to talk as much as it will be facilitating the discussion and keeping it on point. Now, let's address this week's content from the book. With this next set of chapters, we'll continue to establish our theological foundation for rest. But please don't let the word theological frighten you. All of us are theologians to a degree. If you think about it, a theologian is just somebody who studies God. And we've all thought about God. Maybe we don't do formal studies, but we've all thought about God. We all have opinions and beliefs about God. The problem is that many of these beliefs are homespun. They've come from parents or grandparents or neighbors or coworkers, and that's not necessarily bad in itself. But if these beliefs don't align with the scriptures, they are likely to create unrest. And so these homespun beliefs many, many times create unrest in people's lives. This issue presents us with a challenge. Sometimes you have to risk unrest in your efforts to guide people into God's peace. There's no way around it. Think about highway construction for a minute. Okay, maybe you don't want to. We all hate the difficulties that road construction creates, but we also hate the difficulties created when roads fill with potholes and we get flat tires or bent rims. We also hate when bridges collapse and things like that. Given the choice, most of us will begrudgingly take the inconvenience of construction over damaged vehicles or catastrophic failures. There's a good likelihood that some of today's content is going to unsettle some of the people in your group. In fact, some of them might feel as though they're being confronted by a new traffic pattern on an old familiar road. In this, it's important that we not make assumptions about how well they understand the gospel. The erroneous belief of being saved by our good works is a lot more common than we might realize, even among older people who are longtime church attenders. Some folks will take offense to the idea that they are enemies of God and that their good deeds will never qualify them for heaven. That's okay. It's okay that they take offense, is what I'm trying to say. It's something that has to happen for their own benefit. Hopefully, they won't react too strongly, but really, we have to confront this issue. We cannot let it slide. This is an issue of eternal consequence. Now, the primary problem here when we talk about salvation by works is seeking righteousness through law, is seeking God's approval by measuring up to standards. Law-based living involves us, by our own strength, trying to live up to various standards of behavior. This attempt at self-righteousness is at the heart of unrest, and Jesus calls us to a very different approach. Through the cross of Christ, we begin at a place of security. That is where we start. It's our starting point, which then allows us to break free from the exhausting need to measure up. But in this world, we seek a place of security by our performance, by our self-effort. So this difference is huge. It is a difference between life and death, and it's one that we want to get settled in our Christian lives. We begin through faith in Jesus at a place of security, and then everything else gets worked out from there. As we look to the Lord and learn of His ways, we can begin to make adjustments to better align our lives with His good design. This process of aligning, in turn, allows us to abide in His presence as a way of life. And it is out of this abiding that we experience the best that life has to offer. As we abide, we experience his peace and strength. As we abide, we discover his plans and purposes for our lives. And as we abide, we become effective servants of God in a world of desperate need. This abundant lifestyle of abiding requires that we live by faith. We live by faith, which is often problematic for those in the Western world. As much as we might like to think of ourselves as people of faith, we generally do not appreciate the idea of living by faith. We want to possess faith, like something that we keep in our pocket and pull out when we need it. But God calls us to live by faith, to exercise faith as a lifestyle. We bristle at this. Situations that compel us to exercise faith seem too uncomfortable and too unsettling, which is another reason why we experience so much unrest. But if we want to know and experience God's peace, faith is a prerequisite. It is required. And if you, as a leader, are helping to guide others on their journeys of faith, you'll need to have your own seasoned experience with living by faith. If the Lord entrusts people to your care, he will go to great lengths to prepare you to care for them effectively. As Christian leaders, it's not just book smarts that we bring to the table. It's also the wisdom gained as we make our own faith journeys. And once you've gone through the rigors of traversing those hills and valleys and all their rocky trails, you are so much better equipped to gently guide others and to provide them with hope in the process. But it all begins with understanding the gospel and getting God's plan for salvation settled in our hearts. Let's do that first and then build upon that foundation. Have a great and meaningful meeting.